So we're going to kick off with our first panel session. So I'm going to invite Kirby and Shashwat to join me, please. So we're actually going to talk about some fundamentals on NHIs. What are they? The criticality and the key risks and challenges. Okay, so Shashwat and Kirby, welcome to session number one, where we're going to be talking about what are NHIs, what are the risks and challenges, and why they're so critical to an organization. So why don't we kick off, Kirby, Shashwat, give a quick introduction and also tell the audience a fact that they may not know about you.
Hey folks, I'm Kirby Fitch. I am a product manager at SailPoint. I am the product manager for SailPoint's non-human identity solution. And a quick fun fact about me is that I have spent a good part of the past year.
Sorry for the musical chairs.
Musical chairs. And I've spent a good part of the past year really kind of focused on how to use machine learning technologies to find all of these non-human identities that y'all are looking for in your ecosystems. That's it.
Hi. Hey folks. Hey folks, I'm Shashwat. I'm the co-founder and CEO at P0 Security. We help organizations secure access for all kinds of identities, and the last 12 months I've personally spent a whole lot of time trying to understand and explain what are the different kinds of attack paths that malicious actors can use to exfiltrate your data using all kinds of non-human identity risks. So really excited to dive deeper into those today.
Okay, and is there an interesting fact you both want to share that no one knows about you?
Well, I would really like to ride bikes. I think that's a lot of fun.
Okay, thank you. Kirby?
Back when I was younger and fitter, I used to play tennis at a reasonably advanced level. But not anymore.
Okay. I was thinking about whether I should share some fact about myself, but given that you probably see me every day on LinkedIn posting, I think everybody knows everything about my life story. But one small fact, I'm an avid record collector. I've now amassed a sort of a vinyl collection of about 2,000 albums. I love soul, R&B. And an interesting fun fact, I ordered an LP on eBay, and as I was cleaning it, 150 pounds came out of the record sleeve. But being a very honest person, I sent the money back to the owner. So that's a little fun fact about me. Okay, we're going to have a little bit of fun to begin with. So that these are some embarrassing photos of me at a recent IM conference in Netherlands, where I had some lovely pictures with some animals. So look, I want to first start about talking about terminology. In the industry, there's a number of different camps around what do we call this thing. Obviously there's non-human identity, that's how we've called our group, but there are other terminologies in the industry. Some groups like to talk about machine identities as the way to classify this problem space. Some people talk about workload identities, and some people like to poke some fun saying non-human identities are all about animals and aliens. So, clearly it's important to converge on a common term. Unfortunately, we haven't done that yet as an industry, so you are going to hear different terms being used by different folks in the industry. As I said, non-human, machine, workload. So kicking off with that thought, Shashwat, do you want to talk a little bit about what's your thoughts around the terminology? Where do you sit around this interesting position on terminology, and just share some thoughts on that topic, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree with your assessment that for better or for worse, the industry hasn't aligned on a certain set of standards around non-human identity. And I think it's important to distinguish, in my opinion, what is an identity versus what is a credential. right? And there are a whole lot of things or terms that go into identity, and there are a whole lot of things or terms that go into the space of credentials. What is a non-human identity? It depends what system you're looking at. If you're in AWS, it's usually an IAM role which is used by a workload or a service, right? If you are in LDAP or if you are in Active Directory, it's usually a service account or an account that is not backed by a human entity, right? If you are in Azure, it's a service principal. If you are in GCP, it's a service account, right? So any kind of an account or which is an entity which can take some action on some resource, in my opinion, is an identity. And it's equally important, as I said, to distinguish what is not an identity, right? Any kind of for example, an access token or an API token or a short-lived certificate, all of these, in my opinion, are credentials which could be used by non-human identities. And I think it's really important to have a program which makes this difference, but at the same time secures both of these, right? Because you need to ensure that the identities are being secured as well as the credentials that they could possibly be using are being secured as part of one holistic program.
Okay, thanks, Shashwat. Kirby, you want to add anything from your perspective?
No, I think that's a really fair way of looking at it, is that these are things that are not directly owned by a person, that have entitlements, they can take actions, they can get to resources, and those are certainly identities. And the way they do that is with authorization, with credentials, which can also then be rolled up into that same non-human identity paradigm. I think that's a fair way to look at it.
Okay, thank you. Just going to now share kind of a view that our group put together around our definition of non-human identities. So Kirby, why don't you take the audience through kind of what constitutes non-human identities, the types, the different subcategories, and talk a little bit about the criticality of NHIs.
Sure, I can do that. So the ones that really jump out to me that I spend a lot of time working with in my day-to-day from an IM lens on this is really going to be the kind of service accounts, technical accounts, admin accounts, and system accounts. These are typically things that services are using to talk to other services. For example, automated teller machine at a branch might actually be a version of a service account. And then as Shashwat was saying, is that these accounts are using API keys, tokens, certs, and things like that to authorize themselves, which is why I think it is good to really kind of roll them up into non-human identities, is because while they're doing different things, they are all related in certain ways. And then, of course, depending on who you are, I think really matters for the further breakdown between machines, devices, and software workloads. So there are device administrators out there who are really focused on kind of device trust, certs and things like that. They're really kind of looking into finding non-human identities that are representative of machines and devices. But then if you're in a kind of DevOps realm, so maybe you're an AWS administrator or Azure or GCP, you're very kind of interested in these software workloads, containers, virtual machines, and I think they're all kind of coming together under this one non-human identities umbrella.
Okay, thanks, Kirby. Shashwat, is there anything else you wanted to share from your perspective?
No, I think this is a great summary of the conversation. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think the row at the top, it's NHIs plus NHCs, what I like to call non-human credentials, right? A few of these, in my mind, are identities. The rest are credentials. All are important as part of any holistic NHI program, and they are found everywhere. They could be found in applications. They could be found in code repositories, processes, APIs, and increasingly in LLMs and chatbots. So it's very important to have a holistic program that can understand the attack paths that can start from any one of these understand the lateral movement risks that exist from any one of these and present those to you holistically.
Okay, thanks, Shashwat. Look, one thing I did want to point out, look, this is kind of our group's definition of non-human identities. You know, sort of in the broader market, other research groups have kind of got slightly broader definition of NHIs that include things like animals and legal entities, but kind of what we're going to be focused on today is really around sort of machines, devices, software workloads, and everything that's used to automate software running kind of in our environment without human intervention. Okay, we're now going to move on and talk a little bit about, you know, what are the risks and challenges of non-human identities, and look why NHI is more challenging to manage than human identities, and what are the biggest security risks that we have around NHIs. So Shashwat, why don't you share your initial thoughts, maybe if you've got some real life examples that you may want to share as you've dealt, you know, working with various clients. Share your thoughts on the risks and challenges, please.
Yeah, I mean, all of these challenges that you've put out here are very relevant, right? The way these manifest in real world situations, I'll take two examples. And these are customers that I've seen who face these challenges day in, day out. So for one customer, they had recently completed a big migration to GCP and Azure over the last 5 years. A quick show of hands, how many of you are in a position where you've had a good size migration to a cloud provider, and the guidance from leadership in the beginning was, okay, let's prioritize the lift and shift of workloads before we worry about other things? All right, so I see a few hands. And what typically happens in cases like these is once you are doing a lifting and shifting, and the emphasis is on making sure things get moved to the cloud, security in the beginning usually takes a backseat. And once that happens, you know, developers and other owners of your company assets play a little fast and loose, and there are no governance policies in place, and all of a sudden you'll see service accounts all over the place. There might be 1,000 developers and there might be 100,000 service accounts. And these are going up over time, and there'll be static keys and credentials all over the place. And this usually happens because there is no governance program. And all of a sudden, once the cloud lift and shift has stopped, people will realize, leadership will realize, okay, now we need to start making security more of an equal stakeholder. And that's when suddenly people will realize, okay, we need to have an NHI governance program in place. Yet another example is, you know, of one of our customers that we've been working with. They are a very clearly a dev shop, and what they realized was there are so many attack paths to their sensitive data in their on-prem environments, because a developer could get secrets that are stored in GitHub. Those secrets could give them access to a virtual machine. They could SSH into that virtual machine. Once they are inside that virtual machine, they may have secrets to or credentials to an LDAP service account. And those service accounts could give them admin level access to a whole lot of different services, right? So with NHIs, it's also very important to understand there are a whole lot of lateral movement risks which allow you to go from one system to another system. It's not sufficient to just do an inventory or a risk of every NHI and every credential. You also have to look at how those credentials could allow you to jump from one system to another. And as a result, those risks can be amplified.
Thanks, Shashwat, for some great insights there. Kirby, do you want to share some thoughts as well?
Sure, do. So that lateral movement problem, that's a real thing. Where I have seen customers kind of start their journey with risks and challenges is usually an auditor comes to them and says, hey, prove to me that you just have a complete inventory of your non-human identities. And that's kind of when the panic really ensues. So I think that ties to the kind of lack of visibility bit there. I've heard real stories about when this happens, there's an administrator out there who says, then I spent the next 2 weeks going through Active Directory, looking for words like service or bot, trying to put this all into a list. And what did I do with it? I put it all into a spreadsheet. Did I get them all? I hope so. And then from there, we started asking ourselves even harder questions, like, do we still need this account? But here's the thing, is you can't really figure out if you still need this account or this non-human if you don't know who owns it. And then, like, what do you do with that? Well, you can ask around, but what I've seen people doing is actually turning these things off. They call it like a rolling brownout or a scream test or something like that. If you turn off an account for 15 minutes and someone screams, you've found the owner. Why do we want to have the owner? Because if an incident happens with that account, we want to know, who to talk to. So kind of the ones that are jumping out to me on the list is just being able to get visibility, to get ownership, and then back to the why of this all is the excessive privileges. We've had engineers adding privileges to these over time, over years, and we don't want them to have more privileges than they need because of that exact lateral movement problem that Shashwat was talking about.
Okay, thanks, Kirby. Just from my perspective, look, I think to summarize, look, NHIs typically have very weak controls. NHIs are always an afterthought at organizations. They focus more on the human controls, PAM, protecting their borders, barriers. And look, the NHI problem's been around since computers existed. In the early days, it was service accounts, database, technical accounts. So we've always had these NHIs in the environment, but just with all the hyper-fragmentation that we're now seeing in the environment, cloud, we've seen exponential growth in NHIs. We're seeing a lot of breaches, and sort of the following sessions are going to talk a lot more about, these areas. I guess Shashwat and Kirby, let's sort of just talk a little bit about why managing NHIs is different to managing human identities, or where is there the overlap between the two types of identities? Shashwat, you want to share some thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, so there is overlap and then there are differences. So the overlap is ultimately the use cases are very similar, which is that an auditor will come and ask people that, hey, present me a list of all identities, users, and as well as service accounts and NHIs. That's one. Tell me who are the owners of these identities. That's two. Tell me which ones of these are overprivileged and which ones of these haven't been rotated, whose credentials haven't been rotated. And four, just manage the life cycle of these identities, right? So that is where the overlap exists, which is that the four fundamental use cases are very similar. The differences are that these identities are used very differently. There are many more in number. So the form factor of the product becomes very different, right? It's one thing managing 1,000 users, it's yet another thing managing 100,000 NHIs. So the form factor of the product looks very different. The way the product works and behaves, the way it integrates to your environments is very different. In one cases, it's only reading user information from Active Directory. In other cases, it's reading NHI information from a vast variety of sources, from logs. Standards don't exist. So the product fundamentally looks very different, right? So yeah, I mean, there are overlaps, but at the same time, there are a fair number of differences as well.
Thanks, Shashwat. Kirby, anything else to add?
Yeah, I think I'm really watching the volume problem. So if you're a business and you have 50,000 employees, you definitely have 50,000 non-human identities, probably far more than that. And with this whole AI agent boom, rise of further automation, things like that, I think we're going to be going from 1-to-1 to 10-to-1 to 1,000-to-1, maybe even more. Kind of interesting to see where this all plays out. So just volume between human and non-human is a big deal. And then I think the other thing is with human, we have all these agreed upon governance controls that we really like. So for example, we know that a human is done when they're taken out of the HR system, like Workday. We review them on a regular basis, and we know who can review them. We give that review to their manager. These are the kinds of things that we're really missing with the non-human. Is we have no authoritative source. We have no concept of a life cycle state. We have no management review process to figure out when this thing is done.
Yeah, great thoughts there. Look, one final closing thought I will share with the audience. Look, a lot of people, when they think about the risks of NHIs, they think about the external threat, some hacker getting an exposed API key, and getting into your organization. But look, the other side of the risk is kind of the internal threat, and this is the one that doesn't get talked about a lot. I can guarantee you pretty much in every one of your organizations, your staff are using NHIs to bypass controls. And a large organization where I ran an NHI program, we implemented the standard things with humans, implementing PAM, and what we saw was people didn't like using the sort of PAM solutions. It slowed them down. We saw an exponential increase in people using NHIs. They knew the passwords. They were easy to discover. And we've even seen massive issues, internally within organizations where we've caused operational impact. There's been data leakage. And in one organization, we started an NHI program due to someone internally using an NHI. So from a compliance, a SOC standpoint, you really need to be concerned about what your internal staff, your contractors, what are they doing with NHIs? And generally, it's not acceptable to be using NHIs, by humans. It should be for automated processes, unless you're using PAM controls. Okay, I think, thank you, Shashwat, Kirby, for your thoughts around the risks and challenges, what are NHIs. So, thank you.